Hello and welcome to our MSc MedSci Clinical Pharmacology Programme Q&A session. We're joined by Willie Miller, so he is going to do his best to answer all the questions that you have about the programme. So please do use the chat box to answer any additional questions you've got, and we'll run through a list of commonly asked questions that were typically asked. If you've got any questions that are about finance, funding, accommodation, I'll put some useful links into the chat box. And we've also got our postgraduate online event coming up on the 6th of March, so this week. So that'll be a really good session because there's different sessions about those different things. So I'll put the details in the chat box for you. But Willie, would you like to kick off, introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your programme?
Sure, thank you very much. I was going to say good morning, but good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you're joining us from. Thanks very much for coming along today. My name's Dr. William Miller. I'm Director of Education in our School of Medicine, Dentistry and Nursing, which sits within our College of Medical, Veterinary and Life Sciences. And one of the roles that I have is that I'm sort of honoured, I guess, to help lead our MSc in clinical pharmacology. So I work alongside one of my colleagues called Professor Jessie Dawson. Together we run the programme. It's been going for about 40 years now. And yeah, it's really nice to be able to meet with you this morning, and we'll give you some information and hopefully be able to answer some of your questions.
Perfect. I think we'll kick off. So where are classes typically held?
Sure. As things stand just now, there's been a bit of a transitional period. But as things stand just now, the plans are that next year all of our classes will take place on the main campus in Gilmore Hill. We do have a number of sites across the city. There may be the occasional event that takes place in one of the teaching hospitals, for example. But I would suggest that students who are coming to join us in Glasgow expect to be taught and be based on the main campus at Gilmore Hill. And I guess that would probably be useful in terms of planning accommodation and so on as well.
Perfect. And I know there's no typical week in an MSc, but we're always asked, like, how often should I be expecting to be in classes or on campus? And can you give us a bit of an insight?
Sure, yeah. What I might do, Naomi, is go back and give a quick overview of the programme as well, in a bit more detail, but I'll maybe come back to that. But in terms of a typical week, there is a bit of a difference between postgraduate experience and undergraduate classes. So the way that I try and describe this is that for our postgraduate students, what we're doing is providing you with the sort of skeleton of the information that you need. There's an expectation that at postgraduate level, there should be a bit more of a sort of professional approach, a bit more of student-led learning and teaching and so on as well. So typically we would expect to see students maybe 3 days out of the five on average. And within those days, it's unlikely, unless you're in a lab class, it's unlikely that you would be in lessons from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. There tends to be a bit more space within the timetable, and that's deliberate. And the idea is that students can use the space outside of the formal teaching sessions to engage with the literature, to go to the library, to meet together, to discuss things. And so what we're asking students to do, or hoping students will do, is do their own sort of research around the work. So we'll give them the skeleton, and their job is to sort of add the meat onto the skeleton over the course of the programme.
Perfect. And did you say you want to give a wee overview? Just more
Sure.
about the courses and things within
Sure, yes, I can do that. I think it's probably useful to sort of highlight there's sort of four main strands to what we do. So our MSc, like other MSc programs, consists of 180 credits. 120 of those credits come from taught classes, with the remaining 60 credits coming from the research project. So the sort of four strands that we have, we cover quite a lot of basic pharmacology to start off with. That's deliberate because students are joining us from various backgrounds, perhaps from different times in or out of education and so on. And so we sort of unashamedly provide a bit of revision just to make sure everyone's got the same sort of baseline level of knowledge before we start to go into the more advanced stuff. We also, excuse me, spend quite a bit of time on what research means and how we construct research proposals, how we would go about, for example, running a clinical trial, and also the associated statistics, which many students come to and think, oh, if I wanted to be a statistician, I'd be studying statistics. But actually, this is vitally important when we're carrying out clinical research, because we need to make sure we're getting the right ideas and the right outcomes and the true meaning of what we've been doing, rather than what we hope that it'll do. So, so the first strand, as I say, is sort of fundamentals, going back over some of the basics, stuff that for some students, a lot of it will be revision, but we try and go a bit deeper than perhaps they've encountered so far. The second strand is that we have a number of clinically facing classes. So this is the type of content that students might have experienced previously in relation to things like drugs and disease. So going through various types of diseases, looking at the therapeutic options, looking at, again, in quite a bit of detail about these, and again, starting to look at what would happen in particular patient groups. So, for example, the elderly or the young, people who are pregnant, or people who have got renal disease or hepatic disease, which can impinge on the treatment options and the dosage options. So we've got the basics, we've got the clinical focused content. I think probably one of the things that helps distinguish us a little bit is that we also have some forward-looking content. So things that certainly when I was an undergraduate seemed like science fiction, are now coming over the hill very, very quickly. So things like gene therapy, personalized medicine, pharmacogenomics, and so on. These historically might not have been within the typical realm of a pharmacologist or a clinical pharmacologist, but I strongly suspect that for our current students and future students, these are things that are going to be a mainstay of what they need to know and understand and be able to feel comfortable working in. So we've got our basics, we've got our clinical stuff, we've got our forward-facing content, and then the last thing is the research project that I can maybe talk a little bit more about in more detail later, if that works.
Perfect. You mentioned like the backgrounds of students. Is it typically quite mixed, or is there sort of certain degrees that you tend to see?
So our students tend to come as pharmacists, as pharmacologists, as students who've studied pharmaceutical sciences, as medics, as nurses occasionally. We also sometimes have students who come from a bit of a wider background. So maybe they haven't necessarily been focused on pharmacology or clinical pharmacology to begin with. And for those students, the MSc is an opportunity to sort of change track a little bit as well. So it is a fairly wide sort of biomedical background. One of the questions we get quite often is students who are coming who've perhaps studied things like traditional medicine, or traditional Chinese medicine, for example. And there can be pros and cons to that. We tend to look at the content of their undergraduate degree quite closely, just to make sure that there is enough alignment with what we do to allow them to go on and study this in the required amount of depth.
Great. And then you mentioned the research project, and it's always something we're asked loads about. So can you tell us about how students go about choosing their topic, when that all kind of happens?
Sure. So actually, we're just about to get into that around this time of year for our current students. There's a number of ways in which students can end up choosing a project. The most common way is that we will collate a whole list of projects from across our college. So that can include cardiovascular, cancer, neuroscience, all sorts of different things where pharmacology can play a role. Um, and we provide this list of projects and we try and align students to the projects of their choice. We will sometimes look at your performance during the top components of the programme, because some projects might be a bit more popular than others. So we need to find a way of, I guess, sort of ranking students. So that's the most common way. And I guess the best way of getting the project you really want to do is to do as well as you possibly can in your top courses. But we also do have we try really hard to make sure that we provide an experience and opportunities that students are really looking for. So if there's something that you come along as an individual that you're very, very interested in, that perhaps you want to study further as a PhD, or it's maybe something in your professional life that you're going to be focused on, and you have an idea for a project, then we're more than happy to sit down with you, to work through that with you, and to try and find a suitable supervisor in laboratory or whatever to work in. So yeah, so we do have a list of projects, but we're also open to students proposing their own projects as well, and we'll try and accommodate that wherever we can.
Perfect. Sounds like there's lots of different kind of options here then, which is always good.
Yeah.
In terms of assessment, what kind of assessments should students expect throughout their MSc?
Yeah, so we again we've tried over a number of years, and actually, ironically, the pandemic helped us as well. It was an opportunity to rethink how we did things. So in terms of our delivery of our content, but also particularly in relation to assessment, we've tried really hard to get away from the idea of having someone sitting in a room and writing everything they know for 3 hours about something. Um, we do still have written assessments. The key things are at PGT level, it's an opportunity for students to show us a deeper level of understanding. So whilst at undergraduate level, it might be a case of factual recall. It's a one-way transmission. You're given the information and then you have to give us it back in terms of an assessment. At PGT level, it's more about showing us that you understand the content that we've been working together on and how you would apply that. So whilst we do still have written assessments, these are written in a way or constructed in a way that allows you to tell us a bit more about what you've done, shows your insight, shows that you understand the work, shows how you would apply the work. We also have other types of assessments that we try and align to what we would call authentic tasks. So there might be some reports or things that we ask you to write that would mirror what a clinical pharmacologist would be doing in practice. We also quite strongly believe in teamwork because for almost excuse me, for almost every job, you will be working as part of a team. Um, and we also try to provide assessments that allow you to brush up on your more transferable skills. So things like giving presentations, designing posters, being able to communicate to the public, and so on. So there's a whole host of different things, and this will vary depending on the particular courses that you're doing.
Perfect. And is there any practical work for students throughout it?
Yes. So I think it's important to emphasise this is a top postgraduate programme. So there will be practical experience, but like I mentioned at the outset, 120 of your credits will come from top courses, with 60 credits coming from the project. So the project is certainly one area where students can get involved in doing practical work like labs and so on, if that's something that they're interested in. Throughout the various courses, there are various activities, including lab courses and so on, that students can get involved into. Um, but I think it's probably fair to say that the majority of the content is quite theory based, with occasional punctuated opportunities to get into a lab and apply some of that theory. We don't try to make you experts in a particular laboratory method during this program. That's not really what we're setting out to do. It's more about giving you some experience, some insight into things, so that when you encounter them further down the line in your career, you understand what a Western blot is, for example, and how someone would go about doing one of those.
Perfect. What else have we got? We're always asked, is it possible to sort of manage a part-time job alongside the MSc?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. A lot of our students do. What I would encourage people to think about is that it is a full-time MSc. So, in terms of your commitments, we would expect you to be able to balance things and to be able to attend class and so on and so forth, and that would be your priority. And particularly, we know that people are often traveling from all over the world to join us. We want you to make most of your time in Glasgow, and that may well include having a part-time job or something, but the big prize here is your degree. So I think it's important to highlight that. Um, but in reality, many students do work part time. I think the visa arrangements allow students to work up to 20 hours or maybe 21 hours per week. And there are lots of opportunities to do that. The university is based in the west end of the city. There's lots of shops and bars and restaurants and various things that people can get involved in. We also have an internship hub based in the university where there are jobs available both within the university itself and also some external employers also come along and provide opportunities there as well. So um, the short answer is yes. The slightly longer answer is yes, but be mindful that you're going to be busy. You're going to have a full-time degree to balance as well.
Yeah. And it's probably worth something that's quite flexible, so like hospitality and that it's not then during your class time either.
Yeah, absolutely.
And do students get access to any of the sort of taught material before their class so they can kind of look at what they're doing?
Yes, absolutely. So it's something that as a university, and probably as a sector actually, we're very keen now that um, as far as possible, all your materials will be available in advance. So you've got an opportunity to read over them. And when you come to class, what we try and do is often make the sessions a bit more interactive. So rather than someone standing talking at you for an hour, if you've had the opportunity to read the material in advance, then it means we can discuss things that students are perhaps finding more challenging or more interesting. So absolutely, we've got a virtual learning environment called Moodle. And the usual setup is that for any lecture or teaching session, all the materials and slides and so on are put up there at least a few days in advance of that happening.
Great. And you mentioned, so like not all of our students come from undergraduate degrees straight to postgraduate, some come from work. So is there anything that our sort of future students can do to prepare for their MSc?
Um, So I'm going to be slightly controversial here. I would probably say no. We're set up that we will work with you when you arrive. I think quite often students are coming from different backgrounds. They might be finishing their undergraduate degrees and so on. We don't want you to feel overly stressed and worried about things before you get to Glasgow. We will ease you into the program. It is a 1 year program, so the pace tends to be quite high. But I wouldn't necessarily want someone to spend their summer before they join us um, with their face in textbooks and so on. That said, we do make a number of assumptions. Obviously, there are English language requirements. I'll come back to that in a moment. One of the areas that it doesn't hurt to be up to speed on is around your numeracy. So there'd be a lot of drug dilutions and calculations and so on, working with powers of 10, all these sorts of things, which I'm sure all of our students who are coming to us will have done before. But sometimes if you're not doing it every day, then you sort of learn it and forget it. So the sort of standard content there that you would find in any physiology or pharmacology textbook in the first couple of chapters around concentrations, dilutions, and so on. It's always helpful to be able to do that. But again, we realise that some of these things can be quite challenging as well. To perhaps go back to the English language requirement just for a moment, that's something that gets taken care of separately. That's part of your offer process and so on. I think it's probably fair to say that one of the challenges, because we've got quite an international cohort, one of the challenges of that we see is that people come to us who are very bright, good pharmacologists, good biomedical scientists, but perhaps not quite so adept at English in this very technical environment. And of course, that's maybe not so bad on a day-to-day basis because the lectures are all available online. People can take recordings, they can go back over things and so on. But where it sometimes does become a bit of an issue is when it comes to assessment because all of the assessment is in English as well. So if I could suggest one thing that would make a difference to a class, it would be making sure you're as up to speed with your English and your technical English as you can possibly be, and also be mindful that we have ongoing support for English during the year as well. It's free. We've got people that are employed to deliver this. It's an excellent resource. So I think if someone comes along, finds that, for example, my accent is Glasgow English rather than English English is maybe a bit more challenging. That's something you can do something about. You can go and get involved and maybe upskill your English a little bit further. So yeah,
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The university gets so many sort of support services, so definitely use them. Don't struggle because there's no need to when we have all these facilities for our students. In terms of after the MSc, what kind of careers and jobs do students go on to do?
sure. So like I said, we've been running for quite a long time. So We've got a reasonable handle on this. Um, so there's a number of areas. Uh, as you would probably expect, a number of students each year would go off and work in things like the pharmaceutical industry, working in some of the big companies that are available there. Um, a number of students each year use the MSc as a preparation or as a platform to apply for PhD places, so to stay in academia and get involved in academic research. We also have students who are perhaps coming to us sponsored by their own governments or their health agencies, and what they will quite often do is go back home, but perhaps into a more promoted position, or if they're not already in a position, it will help them find a position in a sort of health service or FDA or equivalent type of body. And then we do have students who go off and maybe do slightly different things. People maybe go off and train to be teachers. People have got involved in scientific writing and so on. So I think some obvious destinations, and then as I say, some others that are wee bit more tangential. But in general, either the pharmaceutical industry, academic research, usually a PhD, or some sort of health service type of employment.
Okay, I think it's actually interesting because more and more we're hearing that students go off into like different jobs, and it's just to do with those transferable skills that they're learning,
Absolutely.
which is always good. Loads of options. That is most of the sort of common questions that we've been asked and submitted beforehand. So we do have a couple of minutes. So if anybody that's sort of joined us live has any additional questions, please do pop them in the chat box. I don't know, Willie, is there anything that we've not covered that you think would be good to pick up on, or I mean, you've covered a lot of information there.
Yeah, I, I, I don't think so. I mean, I think it's probably good to emphasise that it is a very international cohort. It started off as a very niche program aimed at medics, and we've grown from about 8 to 10 UK, British, medics per year doing it part time whilst they're working as doctors. To now, this year we've got 62 students. The vast majority of those are from all over the world. Um, so I think it's a good environment to come and meet people in. It's an opportunity to not just learn about what we're doing here in Glasgow, but also make links with students from other countries. That sort of compare and contrast things, how different health services work, what's a sort of standard practice in one area might be a bit different elsewhere. Um, and Glasgow as a city is a great place to be. I'm a bit biased because I've been here most of my life, but it's quite a small city. It's easy to get around in. Um, the weather could be better at times, but it's fine. And as I said earlier, the west end of the city is a great place to be a student. It's very lively. There's and at different sort of price points for things as well, depending what your budget is, what you want to do. There's always things that you can get out and about and doing in the city. So certainly the feedback we get from our students every year is that they enjoy the experience here. You can see a little bit of the background that Naomi's put together here. We've got some really beautiful buildings. It's quite a nice place just to sort of hang out and further your career in. So, I'd be very, very happy to answer any other questions either today or via the graduate school, or I'm sure you can get hold of my direct email address.
Yeah, I think that's worth noting as well. Today's not your only time to ask any questions that you have. If after this something comes to mind, we do have our program administrator email address on the program webpage, which I'll put into the chat. And the administration teams are brilliant at picking up those queries and sending them to the right person to answer them. So yeah, don't panic that this is your only opportunity to ask those. We'll give it a little minute to see if any last minute questions pop up. But yeah, I think you've covered loads of information there, and it's worth mentioning that outside your studies, there's so much to get involved with at the university. We've got all our clubs and societies, and it's really difficult, I think, not to make friends and to meet new people, because there's always something going on, which is really exciting and breaks up your studying a little bit. But yeah, I think, Willie, thanks very much for your time. I know that you've got a busy diary, so thanks very much for taking time out to speak to us all. And like I said, if you've got any further questions, do get in touch. We'll be sending the recording out in the next couple of days. And yeah, we hope to see you all come September time. So thanks very much. Bye bye.
Bye bye.